Jake Morrison looked out at the massive crystal city below and felt his stomach drop. Zentara Prime stretched across the horizon like a living jewel, its towers spiraling up into the purple sky in perfect geometric patterns. No building was out of place, no street curved where it should be straight. Everything looked planned down to the smallest detail. The user horizon settled onto the landing pad with barely a whisper. Jake straightened his diplomatic uniform and checked his reflection. One more time. 3 years of preparation had led to this moment. Humanity's first official meeting with the Galactic Confederation. He couldn't mess this up. Lisa Carter appeared at his shoulder, her tablet already displaying the greeting protocols they had memorized. She looked calm, but Jake knew her well enough to see the tension in her shoulders. Behind them, Commander Tony Blake stood at attention, his military bearing perfect despite being ordered to leave all weapons behind. The airlock hissed open and Jake stepped onto alien soil for the first time. The air smelled like flowers and electricity. Hundreds of beings waited in neat rows, representing dozens of species Jake had only seen in briefing files. At the front stood Chancellor Vextar, the tall blue-skinned leader of the Centauri race. Jake walked forward, following the exact path marked on the ground. The silence felt heavy. Every eye was watching him. He reached the Chancellor and performed the formal bow they had practiced, hands at his sides, head down for exactly 3 seconds. Chancellor Vextar spoke in perfect English, his voice like wind chimes. "Welcome to Zentara Prime, Ambassador Morrison. The Confederation greets humanity with cautious optimism." Cautious optimism. Not exactly the warm welcome Jake had hoped for, but better than outright hostility. He delivered his prepared response about humanity's desire for peaceful cooperation and mutual understanding. The Chancellor listened with what might have been a smile on his alien features. The formal greetings continued for what felt like hours. Each species representative had their own specific ritual. Jake bowed to some, made hand gestures to others, and carefully avoided eye contact with the ones who found it threatening. Lisa whispered reminders in his ear when he forgot the exact protocols. Everything went smoothly until they reached the Sylphic delegate. The crystalline being stood perfectly still, light dancing through its transparent body. Jake knew the briefing said Sylphic communicated through light patterns, but seeing it in person was breathtaking. Without thinking, he stepped forward and extended his hand. "It's an honor to meet you," Jake said, offering what he thought was a friendly human gesture. The Sylphic S-light patterns suddenly shifted from soft blue to harsh red. Cracks appeared along its surface where Jake's warm hand had made contact. The being made a sound like breaking glass and stumbled backward. Other delegates rushed to help while Jake stood frozen, horrified at what he had done. Lisa immediately stepped in, apologizing in 3 different languages while Tony Blake assessed whether they were about to be attacked. The Chancellor's expression had gone from cautious optimism to barely controlled alarm. Medical technicians swarmed around the injured Sylphic, scanning it with devices that hummed and clicked. Jake felt his diplomatic career crashing down around him. 3 minutes into first contact, and he had already hurt someone. The careful preparations, the years of training, all ruined by a simple handshake. He tried to approach and apologize, but Tony Blake's hand on his arm stopped him. "Sir, I think we should step back," Tony said quietly. His eyes were scanning the crowd, noting the security personnel who had appeared from nowhere. The Sylphic was led away, its light patterns still flickering between red and orange. Jake watched it go, guilt churning in his stomach. Chancellor Vextar approached, his expression unreadable. "Ambassador Morrison, it appears there has been a misunderstanding," the Chancellor said. "The Sylphic do not engage in physical contact. Their crystalline structure is highly sensitive to temperature variations. Your gesture, while well-intentioned, was quite dangerous." Jake felt his face burning with embarrassment. Deeply. "Sorry, Chancellor. I meant no harm. Is the delegate going to be okay?" "The medical staff believes the damage can be repaired," Vextar replied. "However, this incident will need to be reported to the Behavioral Analysis Division. All new species undergo observation during their initial contact period." Lisa leaned in close to Jake's ear. "That doesn't sound good," she whispered. The Chancellor led them through the crystal corridors toward their assigned quarters. The walls themselves seemed to glow with soft light, and Jake could see other beings moving through transparent tubes that ran parallel to their walkway. Everything was clean, organized, and utterly alien. Their quarters were luxurious, but felt more like a display case than a home. The walls were transparent on 3 sides, offering spectacular views of the city, but also making Jake feel like he was in a fishbowl. Privacy screens could be activated, the Chancellor explained, but they were encouraged to remain open to facilitate cultural observation. More watching, Jake was beginning to understand that they weren't really guests here. They were specimens. Tony Blake did a quick sweep of their rooms and found monitoring devices in every corner. Not hidden, but not exactly advertised either. Lisa set up her diplomatic workspace while Jake stood at the window, looking out at the perfect city below. On Earth, cities grew organically. Streets curved around obstacles. Buildings were different heights and styles. People made their own paths. Here, everything followed a plan. It was beautiful but cold, like living inside a mathematical equation. Jake touched the wall and it responded to his presence, displaying information about local customs and regulations. The list was impressively long. No weapons, no unauthorized technology, no deviation from approved cultural exchange protocols, no unsupervised contact with local populations, no modification of assigned living spaces, no introduction of foreign biological materials. The rules went on and on. Jake had known there would be protocols, but this felt excessive. How were they supposed to build relationships with so many restrictions? A soft chime announced an incoming message. Chancellor Vextar's image appeared on their communication screen, informing them that dinner would be served in 2 hours, and that they should prepare for formal introductions with the Confederation Council the following day. Jake looked at his companions. Lisa was already studying cultural briefings while Tony Blake continued his security assessment. They had made it to the core worlds, but Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they had walked into a cage. A very beautiful, very sophisticated cage, but a cage nonetheless. Outside their transparent walls, the perfect city continued its orderly existence, and Jake wondered if humanity would ever truly fit into such a precise universe. Dr. Eleanor Rodriguez adjusted her viewing screen and frowned at the data streaming across her display. 3 weeks of observing the human delegation had produced results that made her deeply uncomfortable. Her job as a xenopsychologist was to study new species and determine their compatibility with Confederation society. But these humans defied every model she had developed. The morning briefing with the Behavioral Analysis Division had not gone well. Director Kethmer had listened to her preliminary findings with growing alarm, his tentacles writhing in the way that indicated extreme agitation. Elena had tried to soften her conclusions, but the numbers didn't lie. Human creativity levels exceeded safe parameters by 400%. Their problem-solving approaches showed dangerous levels of unpredictability. Most concerning of all, they seemed incapable of following established procedures without modification. Every human she observed treated rules as suggestions rather than absolute requirements. Elena pulled up the security footage from yesterday's incident in the maintenance sector. Pete Jackson, a human engineer, had been touring the power distribution center when alarms began sounding. The Zentari technicians had immediately followed protocol, evacuating the area and calling for specialist repair teams. The malfunction would require 6 hours to diagnose and 12 hours to fix using approved procedures. Pete Jackson had ignored the evacuation order. Elena watched him disappear into the maintenance tunnels, while Zentari security debated whether to forcibly remove him. 20 minutes later, the alarms stopped. The power distribution problem that had plagued Zentara Prime for over a century was simply gone. Elena replayed the footage of Pete emerging from the tunnels, covered in grease and grinning widely. His explanation to the stunned technicians had been recorded by the security system. He had used spare parts from 3 different systems, bypassed 7 safety protocols, and created what he called a simple bypass circuit. The Zentari engineers were horrified. Pete's solution violated every principle of proper engineering. It should not have worked. When they demanded he explain his methodology, Pete had shrugged and said it was basic common sense. Elena switched to another file. Amy Foster, the human cultural attaché, had organized what she called a musical performance to showcase human artistry. Elena had approved the event, thinking it would provide valuable behavioral data. She had not expected the psychological chaos that followed. The human musicians had taken the stage with their primitive acoustic instruments. Elena had observed many species' artistic expressions over her career, but nothing had prepared her for human music. The sounds themselves were tolerable, if somewhat discordant, compared to the mathematical harmonies preferred by most Confederation species. The problem was the emotional content. Human music carried feelings, raw, unfiltered emotions that hit listeners like physical blows. Elena watched the recording of Ambassador Jake Morrison, singing something called a blues song, his voice carrying pain and hope and defiance all mixed together. The effect on the alien audience had been immediate and devastating. 3 empathic Velter delegates had collapsed, overwhelmed by the intensity of emotions they were forced to experience through their natural telepathic abilities. A group of young Zentari had begun moving rhythmically to the music, their bodies responding to patterns their minds couldn't understand. Most disturbing of all, Elena had felt something herself, a stirring of emotions she couldn't name, a desire to move and shout and break free from the careful control she had maintained her entire life. The medical teams had needed 2 hours to treat the affected delegates. Amy Foster had been devastated by the reaction, apologizing repeatedly and offering to cancel future performances. But the damage was done. Elena's sensors had detected elevated stress hormones in 60% of the audience, and psychological evaluations showed lingering effects days later. Elena closed that file and opened a new report from the economic sector. Human Trade Representative Dan Coleman had been conducting what he called market research in the commercial districts. What he had actually done was introduce concepts that were fundamentally disrupting centuries of established commerce. The Confederation operated on fixed-rate exchanges. Prices were set by committee, goods were distributed according to need assessments, and merchants followed allocation schedules determined by the Central Trade Authority. Dan Coleman had begun asking questions that made no sense to alien minds. Why couldn't customers choose which vendor to buy from? Why weren't merchants allowed to compete on price or service? Why didn't supply and demand affect pricing? Elena's economic contacts reported that within days of Dan's visits, young merchants had begun experimenting with flexible pricing. Some had started staying open longer hours to attract more customers. Others had begun offering additional services or improved products. The Central Trade Authority was in emergency session, trying to determine how to stop what they were calling economic contamination. The pattern was clear across every sector Elena monitored. Humans didn't just break rules, they infected others with rule-breaking behavior. Young aliens who had never questioned established procedures were suddenly asking why. Students were challenging their teachers. Workers were suggesting improvements to time-tested methods. Elena had submitted her preliminary report that morning, recommending immediate quarantine procedures. Director Kethmer had read her findings with visible distress. The humans weren't malicious, Elena had explained, but they were dangerous in ways the Confederation had never encountered. Most species that joined the Confederation were either naturally compliant or could be taught to follow established systems. The few rebellious species encountered in the past had been aggressive or hostile, making them easy to identify and contain. Humans were different. They were friendly, well-intentioned, and genuinely wanted to cooperate. They were also constitutionally incapable of conforming to rigid systems. Elena's analysis suggested that prolonged exposure to human behavior patterns was causing measurable changes in alien psychology. Species that had evolved toward collective thinking and social harmony were developing what she termed individualistic neural pathways. The changes appeared to be permanent. The communication screen in Elena's lab chimed softly. Director Kethmer's image appeared, his expression grim. Behind him, Elena could see other department heads gathering for an emergency meeting. Dr. Rodriguez, please report to Conference Room Alpha immediately, Kethmer said. The Council has reviewed your preliminary findings and requires additional data. Before making their determination, Elena saved her files and headed for the door. She had been a xenopsychologist for 20 years, studying dozens of species and helping them integrate into Confederation society. She had never encountered a species that posed such a fundamental challenge to everything the Confederation represented. As she walked through the crystal corridors toward the conference room, Elena passed a group of young Zentari engaged in animated discussion. She paused to listen and felt her heart sink. They were debating whether traditional engineering protocols were too restrictive, questioning why individual creativity was discouraged, wondering if there might be better ways to solve old problems. The human infection was spreading faster than anyone had anticipated. Elena hurried toward her meeting, knowing that her next report would likely determine humanity's future in the core worlds. The evidence was becoming impossible to ignore. Humans weren't just different from other species. They were dangerous to the very foundation of galactic civilization. Captain Rick Stevens was reviewing supply reports when the emergency signal pierced through the quiet of the UES Horizons Bridge. The harsh red light bathed everything in crimson as the communication system crackled to life. Dr. Kate Williams looked up from her research station while pilot Maria Santos immediately moved to the navigation console. The distress call came from Mining Station 7 on the Outer Rim, a small colony that processed rare minerals for the Confederation. The message was fragmented, but clear enough to understand the basics. Reactor meltdown imminent. Evacuation impossible. Thousands of lives at risk. All nearby Confederation vessels were too far away to help in time. That Rick felt his jaw clench as he processed the information. Mining Station 7 was 3 hours away at maximum speed. The Confederation rescue protocols would take at least 6 hours to organize a proper response team. By then, everyone on the station would be dead. Danny Clark, the ship's chief engineer, appeared on the bridge before Rick had even called for him. Danny always seemed to know when something was wrong with any mechanical system. Within 100 light years, his face was grim as he listened to the repeated distress calls. "Captain, we could be there in 3 hours if we pushed the engines past safety limits," Danny said. "But we're under strict orders not to leave Zentara Prime without authorization." Rick looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. These were good people who had volunteered for humanity's first diplomatic mission. They had followed every rule, obeyed every protocol, tried their best to make a good impression on the galactic community. But thousands of innocent beings were about to die while bureaucrats followed proper procedures. The communication system buzzed again. This time it was Chancellor Vextar from Zentara Prime. The alien leader's image appeared on the main screen, his blue features calm and composed. "Captain Stevens, we have received the distress signal from Mining Station 7, Vextar said. "Confederation rescue teams are being organized according to proper emergency protocols. Your vessel is ordered to remain in orbit pending completion of diplomatic proceedings." Rick felt something cold settle in his stomach. He had spent enough time around aliens to understand their way of thinking, but this was different. These weren't just rules about cultural exchange or trade agreements. People were dying. "Chancellor, with respect, our ship could reach Mining Station 7 hours before your rescue teams," Rick said. "We have the capability to help." Vextar's expression didn't change. "Captain, emergency response requires specialized equipment and trained personnel. Your human vessel lacks the proper certification for rescue operations. Please maintain your position while qualified teams handle the situation." The connection ended. Rick stared at the blank screen for several seconds before turning to his crew. Maria Santos was already plotting a course to Mining Station 7. Dr. Kate Williams had pulled up everything she could find about the station's reactor systems. Danny Clark was running diagnostics on their engines. Rick had been a military officer. Before joining the diplomatic mission, he understood chains of command and following orders. But he also understood that sometimes doing the right thing meant breaking the rules. "All hands, this is the captain," Rick announced over the ship's communication system. "We have received a distress call from Mining Station 7. Thousands of lives are at risk. I am making the decision to respond to this emergency regardless of our current orders. Anyone who wishes to remain aboard Zentara Prime may do so. We leave in 10 minutes. No one left the ship. The UES Horizon broke orbit 20 minutes later, accelerating past recommended speeds toward the outer rim. Rick knew they were violating dozens of regulations and probably ending any chance of successful diplomatic relations with the Confederation. He also knew he could live with those consequences. What he couldn't live with was doing nothing while people died. They reached Mining Station 7 to find Confederation rescue ships maintaining what their commander called a safe perimeter. Commander Zekimer of the rescue fleet contacted Rick immediately, his insectoid features radiating disapproval through the communication screen. Human vessel. You are ordered to withdraw immediately, Zekimer chittered. This is a restricted emergency zone. Only authorized personnel are permitted within the danger area. Rick looked past the alien commander's ship toward Mining Station 7. The station was a massive structure built into an asteroid, with industrial facilities and residential sectors housing nearly 4,000 beings from a dozen different species. Warning lights flashed across its surface, and Rick could see escape pods launching into space, only to be caught by the station's gravity well and pulled back down. Commander Zekimer, how long until your rescue teams can begin evacuation? Rick asked. Proper safety protocols require 18 hours to establish secure evacuation procedures, Zekimer replied. Specialized equipment must be brought from the nearest depot, and our crews require time to analyze the situation and develop appropriate response strategies. 18 hours. Rick closed his eyes and did the math. The reactor would reach critical failure in less than 6 hours according to the distress signals. Everyone on that station would be dead long before the Confederation's proper procedures were complete. We're going in, Rick said simply. Danny Clark had already suited up in radiation gear by the time Rick reached the shuttle bay. Dr. Kate Williams was loading medical supplies, while Maria Santos pre-flighted their smallest craft. The shuttle could only hold a dozen people, but it was fast and maneuverable enough to reach the station's emergency docks. The Confederation rescue ships made no move to stop them, but Rick could hear Commander Zekimer filing formal protests and violation reports. As they flew past the safe perimeter, Rick switched off the communication system and focused on the task ahead. Mining Station 7 looked worse up close. The asteroid's surface was cracked and glowing with heat from the failing reactor. Atmosphere was venting from multiple hull breaches, and the station's rotation had become unstable. Getting inside would be dangerous. Getting everyone out would be nearly impossible. Rick docked their shuttle at an emergency airlock and led his team into the station. The corridors were filled with panicking aliens, many of whom had never seen humans before. Rick tried to project calm authority as he made his way toward the reactor chamber. The situation was exactly as bad as he had feared. The cooling system had failed completely. Backup generators were offline, and the reactor core was approaching temperatures that would trigger a cascading explosion. Danny Clark took one look at the readings and whistled softly. Captain, this whole place is going to blow in for hours, Danny said. Maybe less. Rick activated his communication system and contacted the UES Horizon. All available personnel to Mining Station 7 immediately. We're going to need every hand we can get. The emergency session of the Galactic Confederation Council convened at dawn on Zentara Prime, with representatives from over 100 species gathering in the Great Assembly Chamber. Chancellor Vextar stood at the center podium, his blue skin darker than usual with stress. The holographic displays around the chamber showed real-time feeds from Mining Station 7, where human rescue operations were still underway. Dr. Elena Rodriguez sat in the observer section, her research files spread across her portable workstation. The data she had collected over the past month painted a disturbing picture of human influence spreading through core world society like a virus. Young aliens were questioning authority, breaking established protocols, and demonstrating dangerous levels of independent thinking. The Chancellor called the session to order with the traditional harmonic chime. Fellow delegates, we face an unprecedented crisis. The human species has demonstrated a fundamental inability to coexist within our established social framework. Dr. Rodriguez will present her findings. Elena stood and activated the main display screen, charts and graphs filled the air above. The assembly, showing psychological profiles, behavioral analysis, and social disruption patterns. Her voice remained steady despite the gravity of what she was reporting. Honored delegates, my research indicates that human behavioral patterns are causing measurable changes in alien psychology across all contacted populations, Elena began. Species that have evolved toward collective thinking and rigid social structures are developing what I term individualistic neural pathways after exposure to human influence. The Velter representative, still recovering from the music incident weeks earlier, raised a tentacle in objection. Dr. Rodriguez, are you suggesting that human behavior is actually altering our brain chemistry? Elena nodded grimly. That is exactly what I am suggesting. The changes appear to be permanent and are spreading exponentially. Young members of multiple species are beginning to question established procedures, request explanations for rules they previously followed without thought, and demonstrate creativity levels that exceed safe parameters for their respective societies. Murmurs of alarm rippled through the assembly. The Sylphic delegate, still bearing scars from Ambassador Morrison's handshake attempt, flickered with agitated light patterns. The insectoid Keftar representatives clicked their mandibles in distress. Admiral Charles Knox of the Confederation Defense Force took the floor next. His report on human military capabilities had been classified until this morning. The information he shared sent waves of shock through the assembly. Esteemed colleagues, human military doctrine is based on what they call adaptive strategy. Knox reported, their forces are trained to function effectively even when all established plans fail completely. They improvise solutions, modify equipment in real time, and make command decisions at levels far below what we consider appropriate. The Zentari military representative stood up abruptly. Admiral Knox, are you saying humans have no proper chain of command? Knox's expression was troubled. They have command structures, but individual soldiers are encouraged to act independently when circumstances require it. They call it initiative. To our minds, it represents dangerous chaos that could destabilize any military alliance. The session was interrupted by an urgent communication from the Outer Rim. Commander Zekimer appeared on the main screen, his insectoid features radiating frustration and disbelief. Behind him, Mining Station 7 was visible through his ship's viewports, no longer glowing with the heat of reactor failure. Honored Council, I must report that the human rescue operation at Mining Station 7 has been completed. Zekimer announced, all 4,000 station residents have been successfully evacuated. The reactor has been stabilized. The humans accomplished in 4 hours what our protocols indicated would require 18 hours minimum. Silence fell over the assembly. Chancellor Vextar leaned forward, his expression unreadable. Commander, please explain how this was possible. Zekimer's mandibles clicked nervously. The humans ignored all safety protocols. Engineer Daniel Clark entered the reactor core personally, without proper protective equipment, to make manual repairs that should have killed any organic being. Dr. Kate Williams treated radiation poisoning using experimental methods not approved by medical authorities. Captain Rick Stevens coordinated evacuation procedures that violated every established emergency protocol. The commander paused, clearly struggling with his next words. Their methods worked perfectly. No lives were lost. The station is fully operational. Our own rescue teams were still assembling proper equipment. When the humans declared the emergency resolved, the communication ended, leaving the council in stunned silence. Elena looked around the chamber and saw the same expression on every face, regardless of species, fear. The humans had once again proven that their chaotic methods produced better results than established Confederation procedures. Trade Representative Melter of the Economic Council stood to deliver the next report. His findings painted an equally disturbing picture of commercial disruption spreading through the core worlds. Fellow delegates, human trade concepts are revolutionizing our economic systems in ways we cannot control. Melter reported, the ideas they call competitive pricing and customer service have triggered what can only be described as commercial chaos. Traditional merchants are abandoning fixed-rate exchanges, Young entrepreneurs are creating new businesses without proper authorization. Entire commercial districts on 3 worlds have descended into what humans call free market economics. The Silthic representative's light patterns shifted to deep red. Economic representative Melter. What are the projected consequences of this commercial contamination? Melter's expression was grim. If current trends continue, our centrally planned economy will collapse within 2 years. The Central Trade Authority has lost effective control over pricing, distribution, and resource allocation. Citizens are making independent purchasing decisions based on personal preference rather than committee recommendations. Elena watched the delegates process this information. The pattern was becoming clear across every sector of Confederation society. Human contact wasn't just causing isolated incidents of rule breaking. It was fundamentally altering the basic structure of galactic civilization. The session was disrupted by alarms echoing through the chamber. Security Chief Turville burst through the main doors, his reptilian features showing extreme agitation. Behind him came reports of an attack on the council chambers by radical elements opposed to human contact without waiting for proper authorization. Human Security Advisor Ryan Moore and diplomatic aide Laura Bennett immediately began evacuating civilians from the upper galleries. They moved with practiced efficiency, ignoring established lockdown procedures and proper security protocols. Within minutes, they had cleared the danger area and were pursuing the attackers through the building's maintenance corridors. Elena watched the security feeds in fascination and horror. The humans didn't wait for specialized response teams or follow proper chains of command. They simply acted, making split-second decisions and adapting their tactics in real time. Their methods were effective, but completely outside any established security framework. When Confederation security forces finally arrived, they found the attackers already subdued and the civilians safely evacuated. The entire incident had been resolved in 12 minutes. Standard protocols would have required 40 minutes minimum. Just to assess the situation, Chancellor Vextar looked around the chamber at his fellow delegates. Elena could see the resignation in his expression as he prepared to speak. The evidence was overwhelming. Human influence was spreading beyond any possibility of containment, fundamentally altering the nature of galactic society. Fellow delegates, Vextar said quietly, it appears we must make a decision that will determine the future of our civilization. The humans cannot be controlled, contained, or modified to fit our social structure. The question before us is whether we can coexist with a species that represents everything we have spent millennia trying to eliminate from galactic society. Elena closed her research files and waited for the debate that would decide humanity's fate. The trial chamber on Zentara Prime had never hosted proceedings quite like this. Ambassador Jake Morrison stood in the defendant's area, flanked by Lisa Carter and Commander Tony Blake, while the full Galactic Confederation Council served as judge and jury. The charges against them filled 17 different screens round the chamber, each violation of galactic law glowing in red text. Chief Prosecutor Velanoth, a tall crystalline being whose voice rang like singing crystal, began reading the formal accusations. The human delegation stands charged with systematic violation of galactic order, willful disruption of established protocols, contamination of alien populations with dangerous ideological concepts, and posing an existential threat to the stability that has maintained galactic peace for over 1,000 years. Jake felt the weight of those words settle on his shoulders. He had come to the core worlds hoping to build bridges between humanity and the galaxy. Instead, he had apparently become the face of everything the aliens feared most about his species. Defense attorney Linda Parker stood to address the council. She was a human legal expert who had studied galactic law for years, preparing for this moment. Her voice carried across the silent chamber as she presented humanity's case. Honored council members, my clients came to the core worlds with nothing but goodwill and a desire for peaceful cooperation, Linda began. Every action they have taken was motivated by the basic human instinct to help others and solve problems if their methods differ from established protocols. It is not from malice but from a fundamentally different approach to existence. Chancellor, Vextar leaned forward from his position at the center of the judicial panel. Attorney Parker, the issue is not the motivation behind human actions, but their consequences. Your species has demonstrated an inability to function within the systems that maintain galactic civilization. Linda activated a holographic display showing human achievements throughout their short history. Honored Chancellor, humanity has survived and thrived precisely because we adapt, innovate, and find new solutions to old problems. We offer these same capabilities to the galactic community. The first witness called by the prosecution was Dr. Elena Rodriguez. Jake watched as the xenopsychologist who had been studying them took the stand. Her expression was troubled as she began her testimony. Honored Counsel, my research shows that human behavioral patterns trigger measurable changes in alien psychology. Elena testified, exposure to human problem-solving methods, creativity, and independence causes what I term cognitive disruption in species that have evolved toward collective thinking and rigid social structures. Prosecutor Velanoff projected Elena's research data above the chamber. Charts and graphs showed declining compliance rates among young aliens, increased questioning of authority, and what the data labeled as dangerous levels of independent thought. Dr. Rodriguez, in your professional opinion, can these changes be reversed? Velanoff asked. Elena's voice was barely audible. No, the neural pathway modifications appear to be permanent. Once an individual develops independent thinking patterns, they cannot return to purely collective behavior. The prosecution called witness after witness. Commander Zekimer testified about human violations of emergency protocols at Mining Station 7. Trade officials described the economic chaos spreading through commercial districts. Military advisors expressed horror at human tactical flexibility and individual initiative. Each testimony painted the same picture. Humans were infectious agents of change who couldn't be controlled or contained through normal means. Their very presence was transforming alien societies in ways that threatened the foundations of galactic order. When Linda Parker cross-examined the witnesses, she focused on results rather than methods. Commander Zekimer, how many lives were saved at Mining Station 7? The insectoid officer clicked his mandibles nervously. All 4,000 residents were successfully evacuated. And how long did established protocols estimate this evacuation would require? 18 hours minimum, Zekimer admitted. How long did the humans actually take? For hours. Linda turned to address the council directly. Honored delegates, I ask you to consider not just how humans achieve results, but what those results represent. At Mining Station 7, human methods saved 4,000 lives. In the commercial districts, human ideas are creating prosperity and opportunity. In educational sectors, human approaches are inspiring young minds to reach their full potential. The prosecution's star witness was Commander Tony Blake himself. Prosecutor Velanoff had subpoenaed him to testify about human military doctrine, apparently believing that Blake's own words would condemn humanity. Tony took the stand with military bearing, his expression calm despite the hostile atmosphere. Velanoff began by asking him to explain human tactical philosophy. Human military doctrine is based on adaptability, Tony said simply. We train our personnel to think independently, modify plans based on changing circumstances, and take initiative when communication with command is impossible. Velanoff's crystalline form glowed brighter with what might have been satisfaction. Commander Blake, do you understand that such practices represent dangerous chaos to species accustomed to rigid command structures? Tony's expression didn't change. I understand that our methods are different. I also understand that they work. Human forces have never lost a war due to inflexibility or inability to adapt to unexpected circumstances. But at what cost to social order? Velanoff pressed. How can any society function when individual soldiers make command decisions? Tony looked around the chamber at the assembled delegates. With respect, Prosecutor Velanoff, individual initiative is what allowed Captain Stevens to save 4,000 lives at Mining Station 7. Rigid adherence to protocol would have resulted in mass casualties. The trial continued for 3 days. Witness after witness testified to the disruption human presence had caused throughout core world society. Young aliens were abandoning traditional careers to pursue individual interests. Students were challenging their teachers and demanding explanations for rules they had never questioned. Workers were suggesting improvements to systems that had functioned unchanged for centuries. The evidence was overwhelming. Human influence was spreading like wildfire through populations that had no natural immunity to independent thought. Species that had lived in harmony for millennia were developing internal conflicts as individuals began asserting personal desires over collective needs. Linda Parker made her closing argument on the final day of proceedings. Honored Counsel, humanity stands accused of disrupting your social order. We do not deny this charge. What we challenge is the assumption that disruption is inherently harmful. Growth requires change. Progress demands the courage to abandon failed systems in favor of better solutions. She gestured toward the viewing screens showing news feeds from across the core worlds. Young aliens are questioning authority because they have learned to think for themselves. Workers are improving systems because they have been inspired to see beyond the limitations of tradition. Students are demanding better education because they have discovered the joy of learning. Linda's voice grew stronger as she continued. Yes, humans are disruptive. We break rules, challenge authority, and refuse to accept that something is right simply because it has always been done that way. But we also save lives, create prosperity, and inspire others to reach their full potential. The question before this council is not whether humans are disruptive, but whether the galaxy is brave enough to embrace the growth that disruption can bring. The council retired to deliberate. Jake sat with his companions in the defendant's area, watching news feeds that showed the effects of the trial spreading throughout Confederation space. Some young aliens were protesting outside government buildings, demanding the right to think independently. Others were creating underground networks to share human ideas about individual freedom and creative problem solving. The infection had already spread far beyond what anyone could contain. Regardless of the trial's outcome, humanity's influence on galactic civilization was now permanent and irreversible. The Galactic Confederation Council returned to the trial chamber after 12 hours of deliberation. Chancellor Vextar's expression was grave as he took his position at the central podium. Jake Morrison stood with his companions, knowing that the next few minutes would determine not just their fate, but humanity's place in the galaxy. The chamber fell silent as Vextar activated the formal recording systems. Representatives from over 100 species watched as he prepared to deliver the most significant verdict in Confederation history. After careful consideration of all evidence presented, Vextar began, his voice carrying across the vast chamber. This council finds the human delegation guilty of systematic violation of galactic order. More significantly, we find that humanity as a species represents a category alpha disruptive force that poses an existential threat to the stability of core world civilization. Jake felt his heart sink, but the Chancellor wasn't finished. However, Vextar continued, this council also acknowledges that human actions, while disruptive, have consistently been motivated by compassion and a genuine desire to help others. The lives saved at Mining Station 7, the economic prosperity created in commercial districts, and the educational inspiration provided to young minds cannot be dismissed. Linda Parker gripped Jake's arm as they waited for the final pronouncement. Therefore, by unanimous decision of this council, humanity is hereby permanently banned from all core world territories. You have 72 hours to depart Confederation space and are warned that any attempt to return will be met with military force. This verdict is final and non-negotiable. The words hit Jake like physical blows. Banned, permanently exiled from the heart of galactic civilization because they couldn't stop being human. He looked at his companions and saw the same shock and disappointment in their faces. But as Jake processed the verdict, he began to notice something unusual. The chamber wasn't filled with the satisfaction he had expected from the alien delegates. Instead, many looked troubled, even conflicted. Some were whispering among themselves in obvious distress. The reason became clear as Captain Rick Stevens entered the chamber. Escorted by Confederation security, he had returned from Mining Station. 7 to face whatever consequences awaited him. But he wasn't alone. Behind him came a steady stream of beings Jake didn't recognize at first. Then he realized what he was seeing. Young aliens from dozens of species were following Rick into the chamber. Students, workers, artists, engineers, all showing signs of what Dr. Elena Rodriguez had called cognitive disruption. They had been changed by contact with humans and could no longer fit into their rigid societies. A young Zentari stepped forward, her blue skin darker than normal with determination. "Chancellor Vextar, I request permission to leave Confederation. Space with the human delegation." Vextar's expression showed alarm. "Student Kalanara, you are suffering from temporary psychological contamination. Medical treatment can help you return to normal behavior patterns." Kalanara shook her head. "I don't want to return to normal. The humans showed me that I can think for myself, create new solutions, question old methods. I can't go back to blindly following rules without understanding their purpose." More voices joined hers. A Silthic whose light patterns flickered with unprecedented individual expression. A group of Velter who had formed what they called an artistic collective. After exposure to human music, young merchants who wanted to continue experimenting with competitive commerce. The stream of aliens continued for nearly an hour. Jake watched in amazement as hundreds of beings requested permission to leave with the humans. They represented the infected, the contaminated, the ones who could no longer function in a society that demanded conformity over creativity. Chancellor Vextar tried to maintain order, but the requests kept coming. Security forces were overwhelmed by the sheer numbers of aliens wanting to abandon their homeworlds and follow humanity into exile. Dr. Elena Rodriguez appeared in the chamber, carrying a suitcase and wearing civilian clothes instead of her official uniform. She approached Jake with an expression that mixed regret and determination. "Ambassador Morrison, I formally request permission to join your delegation," she said. "I can no longer serve a system that chooses stagnation over growth." Jake found his voice at last. "Dr. Rodriguez, you're welcome to come with us, but I have to ask why you would give up everything here." Elena smiled sadly. "Because in studying your species, I discovered something about my own. We've been so focused on maintaining stability that we've forgotten how to live. You've shown me what we've lost, and I can't pretend I haven't seen it." The exodus continued through the night. By morning, over 2,000 aliens had formally requested to leave Confederation space with the humans. They ranged from students, barely out of childhood, to respected professionals who had abandoned successful careers to pursue the uncertain future humanity offered. Captain Rick Stevens coordinated the evacuation with typical human efficiency, organizing transport ships and supply runs with the help of alien volunteers who had learned to think independently. The sight of humans and aliens working together without rigid hierarchies or endless protocols was both inspiring and terrifying to the watching Confederation officials. As the UES Horizon prepared for departure, Jake received a private communication from Chancellor Vextar. The alien leader appeared on his personal screen, looking older and more tired than Jake had ever seen him. "Ambassador Morrison, I want you to know that this decision was not made lightly," Vextar said. "Many of us recognize the value of what humanity offers, but our society cannot survive the changes your presence brings. We choose security over growth, order over innovation, survival over transformation." Jake nodded slowly. "I understand, Chancellor. I just hope you won't regret that choice." Vextar's expression was unreadable. "Perhaps we already do." The human fleet departed Zentara Prime system, with over 50 ships carrying the humans and their alien companions, as they crossed into uncharted space beyond Confederation boundaries. Jake stood on the bridge watching the core worlds disappear behind them. They had been banned from the heart of galactic civilization, branded as dangerous disruptors who couldn't be contained. But looking around at the mixed crews working together, solving problems through cooperation and creativity, Jake realized they had gained something more valuable than acceptance. They had gained the freedom to become exactly what the galaxy needed, even if it wasn't ready to admit it yet. Communication intercepts over the following months revealed that the human influence continued. spreading despite the ban. Outer Rim colonies requested human advisors through unofficial channels. Revolutionary ideas about individual freedom and creative problem-solving circulated through underground networks. Young aliens across the galaxy began questioning the systems that governed their lives. The ban hadn't contained humanity. It had freed them to become the catalyst for change the universe desperately needed. And in the far reaches of space, beyond Confederation control, a new society was taking shape where humans and aliens worked together to build something better than either could achieve alone. The Confederation had chosen order over chaos, but they had forgotten that evolution requires both destruction and creation. Humanity had been banned from the core worlds, but they carried the future with them among the stars.